Thank you for joining us for another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. Remember, from bombs to order fulfillment, from marketing to taxes, learn the stuff from the pros before you step in it. My name is Erica Dill. I am your host from Operationally Up. We are here to optimize your consumer goods business. And today we are joined by pro Dave Oates. Now, Dave, you served as an officer in the Navy for 9 years with deployments in South America, Haiti, and the Persian Gulf. Thank you so much for your service. And then you transitioned to civilian life, and you have now spent 30 years in crisis communication and PR management. You are the founder of PR Security Service, and you are known as the PR crisis guy. I'm so thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Are you kidding? This is a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Erica.
So I'm so excited about today's topic because I think growing businesses and small businesses, they just don't have contingency plans. They don't think about when things go wrong. They're so focused on growth, 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 growth. But today you're here to tell us the top 3 crisis PR issues that these companies will face without a doubt. You're saying they're going to face these problems.
Oh, yeah, it's a certainty because the 3 problems have to center around inherent operations, people, processes, products, right? And no matter how good we are, how focused we become as business owners and executives and senior leaders within an organization, people are people, products delays happen, processes get refined as things, particularly as you mentioned, as companies are on sort of a fast growth and moving forward. Processes, policies, product operations, people get stretched and things tend to get missed, or at least not communicate well enough that it draws with it concerns, questions, anxiety, misunderstandings. And like it or not, everybody, including staff members, have these wonderful little communication devices that we all carry around. They're as much of a broadcaster as any local television, radio station, and newspaper. In fact, I would argue they often are even more influential nowadays than anything that way. So if somebody's ticked off about something, instead of taking a moment, creating some space, counting to 10, sort of taking, nope, what do? They go to pick one, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and they'll vent their frustrations, justified or not, against an organization or an individual online without question. And if left unchecked, I've seen it where it starts to become fact. It starts to become something that organizations feel that are starting to develop into truth. And why? Because other employees start asking questions, customers start inquiring, business partners, all of the people that make your company and your products go, start to at least just ask, what is this all about? That delays new product launches, that delays current operations, that extends sales cycles, and potentially disrupt profitability and brand reputation. So I try to come in those situations and help organizations get through those, communicate through empathy and action, get back to normal operations as quickly as possible. But yeah, because everybody is basically a broadcaster, it's going to happen to every organization. I don't care how big, I don't care how small, I don't care how fast growth you are, it's going to happen.
The difference between a traditional PR problem and a crisis PR problem?
I would say not a lot. The definition of crisis, in my mind, is anything that calls an organization or an executive leader, front-facing individuals, reputation into question, that disrupts operations. If people at the C-suite and senior leadership are taken away from their duties because they've got to address something that was appearing either in internal Slack channels or externally on Google, Yelp, Facebook, LinkedIn, not just when, a reporter calls. That's may or may not happen, but equally as disruptive the reputation is when things are posted, calling people into question, and now you got to spend time doing that, answering the mail from that one there, right? Because it just delays systems and processes and profitability and sales.
And
growth, right? At a time in which you don't really have a lot of leeway either because you made commitments for product distribution to your distributors or to end user and customers, or simply, you're just trying to keep up with demand. You've got investors who are asking, what is my timeline to an exit, whatever the case may be. And when those kind of things happen where you've got to take away your focus on that, I call that a crisis.
No, it absolutely is. And I think any growing company who is so focused on growth is going to just see that as a massive disruption.
Sure.
So, I mean, I'm assuming that there is a lot of cost, and that's why companies should care that this could be a problem. Do you have an example of like how this could be so detrimental to a company?
Oh yeah, I've got as an example of something I worked on a year ago, and I'll keep the names out of it, but there was a large consumer product manufacturers in the distilled spirits arena. And you're not going to know their name, even if I gave it, because they white label all of their products to big retailers, big box wholesale warehouse. You kind of get where I'm going with this one. They had 1% or about 20,000 bottles of one particular product that had to be recalled because in the manufacturing process, they got the flavor profile wrong. Something happened within the systems where the mixing of different flavors didn't go as planned. And it wasn't toxic. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a health risk. It just didn't taste up to the standards that consumers and buyers had expected. So they were able to pull about half of the bottles in question off the shelves, but the other half had already made it into consumers' hands. At this point, the manufacturer, the product manufacturer had figured out they fixed the glitch, right? They're not forward-facing customers. They actually did all the things they were supposed to do. Costco got notified, and that was it. Problem was, about a month or so later, social media started to chirp about this. Some of the buyers of the few products, a minuscule amount, started questioning the taste. One Redditor likened the taste of this product to a urinal cake, which of course I got at. Yeah, it was they called it urinal cake, but of course it begs the question:
no,
how did they know it tasted like a urinal cake? I'm gonna put that aside because I really don't want to know, and I don't want to care. But I'll continue. So it got to the point where the retailer, the big box warehouse retailer, had to put out a statement, and they said basically, if you bought this product between this day in this area, come back even empty, full refund, or we'll replace it. Got any questions? Here's the manufacturer of it. Here's the contact information. Well, they were caught flat-footed. The manufacturer was, because they don't talk to customers. Well, not only did they get, the consumers themselves calling, but they got spirit influencers on social media, CNN, AP. It went all over, and they didn't know what to do. Much to the point that they didn't respond to any inquiries. So imagine now you've got all of these posting social media, news articles that said this company was unavailable for comment, did not return our phone calls. That gives the consumers the impression. And all of their distribution partners, all of their OEM white label arrangements question whether they cared because they just didn't hear from them. When I finally got introduced, I talked to the president. I said, well, we can't do anything about the news articles. That's a week old. But how are the conversations going with all of your distributors? And they were like, we can't get ahead of this. Everybody now is keep talking about it. Not just the one for the product that was in question, but all our other arrangements. Their bank was even calling them, right? So we put together communication plans to talk about that. We sent products around to tell everybody, look, we fixed it. It was a minor issue. It was located on one lot number, and we got it fixed. But it literally, we spent a couple of months on that, a couple of months after the incident occurred. And so figure this out. There were 2 quarters of delays in purchase orders and shipments. There were added exponential countless amount of hours that executives, shift supervisors, and others had to go and show all of their other partners that their systems were fine, that their product was being made according to specs, and that everything was good. That increased their costs. What should have been a 2-day communication problem. We had the small lot. Here we pulled it. Here's what we do if you get other customer complaints, and tell everybody else under the sun it's all good. And here's why. That 2-day communications matter turned into 6 months, killing 2 quarters,
6 months of
costing them
affected profit. Yeah.
and I'm not even talking about the increased legal exposure of liabilities, because now you've got lawyers involved that are going to talk about contract stipulations and who's responsible for what. It just created such a state of confusion for people because they did not and were not proactive in their correspondence, not just to the news organizations, but just to everybody that they do business with. And that's a prime example about how you may think you solve it, you may think it go away, you may think people aren't going to necessarily be that concerned about it. It was a small it was 1% of their total product yield that was in question. But it goes to show how the lack of a communications plan can be seriously impactful, negatively so, on your bottom line.
That contingency plan that growing companies just aren't thinking about. Well, I think you have everybody's attention, and I think everybody is now terrified of losing 6 months worth of profit. So let's dig into these 3 crises, because I'm assuming that these crises can be planned for and you can have that contingency plan. So let's dig in. What's the first crises that our companies and our listeners are going to face?
Yeah, it's going to be people, right? The first one is going to be involving people. Somebody is going to be out of joint. They walk in with a bad day. Maybe it's a manager, maybe it's a line worker, maybe it's a shift person. Whoever it is going to start to feel like they were not treated well, they were not respected. Maybe it's something systematic. Maybe they were turned down for promotion. Maybe somebody has justifiable cause to raise a concern about somebody who said something inappropriate in the workplace or things like that. If those are the cases, not only do you have to have your HR policies in place and have ways in which to address that and rectify it, but be forewarned, those type of instances have a way of getting out to the rest of your employee base on short notice. It's the worst kept secret in line when somebody else was being accused
confidential.
Right. Or, hey, I don't want to miss, but so-and-so apparently did this to so-and-so, and that's sort of the other thing. And now employers are like, really? Well, what's the company going to do about it? Who's doing what? And if it's not addressed on a broader scale beyond just that one instance, you will find yourselves in a situation where employees are going to slow down their productivity, whether they know it or not, right? They're just not going to feel as bought into the company culture and the company makeup. They won't feel as valued. They may wind up looking for other jobs and taken away from their day-to-day activities or something like that. That's just an example, but you're going to need to develop a communication plan. Now, quick pushback. I always get from lawyers with this one, like, look, I'm dealing with employee privacy laws. How do I address this on a broader scale? I recognize you have to protect employee privacy, but people know what they know. And you're at least going to have to talk about it in terms of, we had this incident involving an employee and such there. Here's what we're doing about it. We're not going to rush to judgment, but please know these are the things we're putting into place now. It's a recognition that the company cares and that they're taking action, and that action has meaning on some level. You can do that and not violate any privacy laws, but saying you can't say anything is only going to allow some narrative by somebody else to become the de facto truth. And so people is the first thing that they're going to deal with. Products, the second thing that particularly for consumer product manufacturers, they're going to be dealing with, right? You may have the best product in the world, and it's not just worried about what competitors are saying. There will be expectations on flavor, consistency, availability is the big one. And so if for some reason you get into a situation where your demand is outpacing your ability to produce that, you got to get ahead of that. One prime example, I enjoy a good bourbon every now and then. And Knob Creek had a situation where, because they aged the bourbon 9 years, they ran into a situation a few years ago where they literally ran out of product. They just couldn't stock the shelves because their popularity was taken off. They took out full page ads and did social media posts showing their bottle was empty and saying, we apologize for that, but please know we are not going to release our Knob Creek bourbon before it ages 9 years. people were asking us, well, why don't we just go 8 years? Why don't we go 8.5? We could do that there. No,
Quality.
our quality is our quality. And we're sorry we're not meeting your expectation now, but please know that we will meet it in short order. And here's when we're going to be
Love
back
that.
up to speed on that one. And we're already producing more product on the back end, so we don't have this problem again, right? Imagine being a consumer product company, spirits or otherwise. I've used 2 spirits. Maybe that speaks about my personal habits, but you've got 2 situations there where you have to predict your customer demand 9 years from now.
Yeah,
9
that's
years from now
insane.
in order to make it work, right? That would keep me up at night. But
I'm sure the production
fact
planners
that,
listening right now are like, what? I have to plan for 8 months, not 9 years.
Right. And this is what you have to do when you're in the distilled spirits where you have an aging process, right? And so they got ahead of it, right? And they didn't lose anything when they came back to the market. Because guess what? There's more than one bourbon brand on the market. There's a newsflash for you. So they could quickly go to another one then. So this is what they had to do, and they did it really well. So that's just another example. And the third is processes, right? Especially if you're a fast-growing company. Things are going to get missed. You're going to need to evolve. And we all are imperfect beings. They don't necessarily come out of the gate smooth, perfect, the first go around there. Giving some space beforehand and letting people know, hey, we're instituting new processes. Here's our expectations. We'll keep you updated is so important, because the big thing about companies when they're facing a crisis is because it's unanticipated, it's unexpected. Yeah. It throws people for a loop. That element of surprise is as much a cause for something to go into a crisis mode, because it just goes against what people have always thought about you. Keeping them informed, especially when you're instilling new processes, you're growing really fast, helps alleviate that. Look, hey, got it, man. You're going great. I'm so glad everybody knows who you are right now. We'll figure this out. And I know I'm not speaking in consumer product, but it's the same thing. I flew to the Midwest here for some family obligations. Gate operators for airlines that say, hey, look, we're going to be about 10 minutes late boarding. Here's why. We're going to be good. We're going to make it up in the air. That calms everybody's nerves, right? 10 minutes is 10 minutes. Not a big deal for most people, even when you're connecting. But if you don't hear anything, your mind starts to play, oh my God, this is going to be 40 minutes. We're not going to be here. How am I going to get there? How am I going to get? Now my anxiety level goes up there. And now, because I'm not being told anything, my perception of my airline, the company, the one that I've entrusted, goes in the tank, just because they haven't heard anything about them. Those are the 3 things that every organization, particularly consumer product companies, are going to face.
So the thing that I've heard like over and over and over again is that when there is something that happens, be proactive in your response. Don't wait. What would that company waited weeks to actually have a response? So it's all about being proactive. So how can companies, knowing that these are going to be the crises, what's the best plan of action to plan for these crises so they can be proactive?
The biggest thing is to identify what are some of the top inherent risks in your organization. And as you develop contingency plans for that on your operations side, on your insurance side, liability side, you should include a communication side, right? And I say the things that I always say that every company, I don't care how big or small, consumer products, business to business, professional service, whatever, are going to need to work on is what happens when an employee feels disenfranchised, right? Harassed, passed over for a promotion or things like that. What are your contingency plans if that goes public? What happens if your product and service doesn't get delivered on time or doesn't deliver according to expectation? And what happens if things outside of your control disrupt operations, like a cyber attack, ransomware, IT system? What happens when your plant is shut down because there's a fire, or people can't get into the office, or servers can't be accessed in that one there, and you've got to do backups? Anything that you've got contingency plans on, largely in the insurance side for, think about how you're going to communicate that. Because it's not just enough to have the operational systems in place to get back to normal operations. You got to let people know what's happening as they are, so they can come along with you for the ride. Because if they don't, they'll freeze up there. And anxiety starts to kick in. And if left unchecked, anxiety will convert to anger from people against the organization, right? It's just, I'm not a sociologist, right? Or a psychologist, but I'll play one here. Anxiety is just such a feeling of inability to deal with this helplessness, disenfranchisement, and they'll convert it to anger against the party they feel is responsible for putting them in that situation. And by the way, it's rarely the individual who will look internally for that, even if in some cases it's warranted. It will be you. How are you going to communicate that? You will save yourself an exhaustive amount of time and money and profitability if you just take into account those basic things that are inherent risks to any business, but in particular consumer product companies.
Things that, you know, our listeners really need to know, and I try to drive home a lot in my communication, is that business owners, founders, they don't have to create these plans on their own. You know, the first one you're talking about people, you know, rope in your managers, rope in your HR directors, and have them help develop some of these contingency plans. I think so many business owners are like, oh, okay, here we go. Now we got to go write this whole contingency plan on our own. But I mean, would you agree? Like, these are things that teams can do together. And the more brain power you have in a room writing these things, the more successful they be when you need to use them.
Oh, they should be done in teams, because the top person is not going to be the one who's going to speak to every single audiences. Yeah, that top person may speak to your top customers, right? Your top business partners, your investors, your, you know, maybe having a public face to news organizations, but you've got the HR people who are going to be talking one-off to employees. You're going to have your customer service representatives who are going to speak to your client base and your VP of sales. You're going to have your VP of channel partners talking to those people. They need to be part of not only the planning process, but also the execution on that. And they need to understand what are the messaging, but also what are the gotcha questions for which they need to respond. Because it's not the first statement that will get most organizations into trouble. There will be follow-up questions from the audiences. And you hope that happens, because that means they're still engaged. They're asking, they're curious, they want some reassurance. But most of the time, those type of conversations and questions from those particular audiences will come with an inherent bias, subconsciously so in many cases, but those audiences will tend to believe that something was missed, either by ignorance or on purpose. And you're going to want to be prepared for those questions that could trip you up, especially if you're going to take those questions personally, as often good leaders do, because their personality, their identity is part of the organization's culture makeup, right? Not exclusively, but certainly a good percentage of it. And they need to be ready for those questions to be able to show in a very empathetic and action-oriented manner. And this is crucial. I don't care what the response is, or what the issue is, or what the organization is, or where they're at, or what industry. You have to respond with empathy and action in order to allay the concerns of people and show that you care. And by empathy, I don't mean you have to admit culpability. If there's no wrongdoing, then you shouldn't own that. But you should empathize with the individual and recognize their anxiety and their concerns, and sometimes their fear, to feel like give them the sense that they are connected to you and that you care. Because if you don't, all you'll do, if there's a lack of empathy or a lack of action in your response, you will just increase the anxiety. And again, that's going to turn into anger, and the crisis will continue unabated.
These companies are being proactive. They're getting their teams together. They're creating their contingency plans. At a certain point, they might need to call you. When is that point that they're like, oh, okay, now we need the guy?
So I tell people this. I tell folks, call me when the stuff hits the fan. Only, I don't use stuff. But I prefer to be called, and I'm fine. You call me then, we'll figure things out. Much like was the case with that distiller that waited, weeks to do so. There's still things to do, but there are greater opportunities the earlier I get called in. Be that at the planning stage, when you are identifying the risk, that you can create contingency plans and general messaging and train up, so that way you can diffuse a situation beforehand. But even if you don't have that, and there's catching wind of something, like an employee starting to complain a lot, you've got, they're making efforts to contact HR. Customers are like, keep calling, like, when is this product going to be out? What's going on here? Or you're getting questions about your processes and how this is going to flow and things like that. If you're starting to get wind of those type of questions and concerns, it would be a great time for me to be brought in, because in addition to creating the plans for the oh crap moment, there are likely opportunities where a good communication strategy can help allay concerns, give you a little bit more space, and diffuse a situation before it becomes a crisis. My job is to help organizations, when they're in a situation like this, get back to normal operations as quickly as possible. This is a business issue here that has origins of a question on reputation, but ultimately this is a bottom line concern. And I'm sort of brought in to sort of stave off any further bloodshed, so that way they can keep profitability and the sales pipeline and market share intact. And the earlier I can get brought in on a situation, the greater chance I have to help organizations do just that.
Yeah, and not lose 6 months of profitability.
Right.
Ooh.
Exactly.
Well, David, this has been an incredibly wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure our listeners are now thinking about contingency plans, which has been my dream. But if they do want to follow you, they want to follow your content, they want to reach in touch, how can they get a hold of you? Where are you at?
The best place to find me is go on LinkedIn. You can just Google Dave Oates Crisis PR. My LinkedIn profile shows up, as well as my Facebook and Instagram, but LinkedIn is the one that I generate the most content under. I've also got a website, publicrelationssecurity.com, PR security service, public relations security. But just Google Dave Oates Crisis PR. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Reference that you were watching and listening to this podcast, and I'd be glad to connect. And I tell people I'm a business owner and entrepreneur myself, so I'm glad to just take 15 minutes and offer perspective without any expectation that it turns into a client matter. If I can be that kind of resource for folks, I believe karma is a legitimate currency, so I'm happy to give it.
Well, and you've already given so much good karma today, and we're going to include the links. So make sure that you check out David's LinkedIn profile here below this video. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who follow the podcast regularly, I'm Erica Dill, Operationally Up, and we will see you again soon. Thank you, David, and contingency planning it is.
Thanks, Erica. Really appreciated the time.
Bye.